Today on Focus on Why, I am joined by Angie McQuillan. Angie, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. And also thank you to Madeline Black for introducing us. So I might have an indication of why she's introduced us, but no biases or no kind of mind reading here. But what is it you're focusing on right now, Angie?
Well, you just mentioned Madeline Black, which is probably a good segue into one of the reasons why we're speaking. But Madeline's very open about her story, but she's a sexual assault survivor. She was raped at a very young age, and I have a very similar story to her. It is slightly different, but it's on the same lines. So I reached out to Madeline just initially as a point of support to say, how have you dealt with it? Where are you with it? And everything like that. Um, which is how obviously she introduced me to you, and that's what brings us to here. So that's the situation that how I met Madeline, and what I'm doing at the moment is navigating through having just spent 6 years in the justice system.
6 years in the justice system. What was it that you were trying to achieve?
So I was violated sexually. I was raped basically at age 16. And I didn't report it until I was 39 years old. So there was a lot of containment and suppression and shame suppression as well, should I say, throughout those years. And then I reported it when I was 39 in 2019, and then he was sentenced to 6 years in 2025.
They're a big deal, those three elements: the containment, suppression, and shame.
Hmm.
Tell me, what does that feel like to experience that over that period of time?
I think the suppression, shall we say, is actually over 30 years because
Mm.
obviously the offence happened when I was 16. The worst part of the shame was having to navigate through those first 23 years before I absolutely hit breaking point where I had to go to the police. And I think that's probably the most difficult part for people to understand of like what was the delay? Why was it 23 years later? And it was dealing with all of the suppression, the shame, and the longer it went on. I mean, I was so young when it happened, but the longer that it went on, it almost felt like a year, another year further away from being able to even say anything about it. So it's a year ago, it's 2 years, it's 3 years. Now you start multiplying that when you get to 17 years, 18 years, until the point where I was still trying to not have to do anything about it, didn't want the fuss, didn't want to have to go to the police. I didn't know what was even the justice system looked like. But I just basically got to the stage where if I didn't do it, I was going to implode. Like the cost of silence was actually bigger than the cost of speaking out. So despite it wasn't an easy thing to do, it was easier than trying to carry on surviving as that silent survivor with all that total turmoil of all those different emotions, and shame being one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, the cost of silence.
Hmm.
That's a really evocative statement. What was the cost of silence, or what could it have been?
Wow. The cost of silence for me was having to almost lead a double life. That's how it felt. And it's a really hard thing to describe. I actually made a post about this on LinkedIn today, but it's hard to describe because it almost sounds like I desperately want people to know. It's not that I wanted people to know. I just didn't want to have to lead a double life anymore. And that was how it felt when I was doing it, because when you're carrying something that sort of something so dark and something so important, it effectively you feel like it's going to risk changing every relationship that you have and how people see you for the rest of your life. It's going to change. People then might doubt you because there's been a time delay before you actually come forward. So the fear of not being believed because of all the time that's taken to actually do anything about it, you end up having to navigate conversations that you know that you could be potentially reactive to, or you just try and avoid them altogether, or you become a guru at redirecting them away from even potentially being exposed in this way. And it affects the relationships you have from an intimacy perspective. Sometimes it affects the friendships that you have because it might change if they're new. So despite people think it's just a secret, actually it has a bigger impact on a day-to-day living than people understand. So it's not that I want to broadcast it. It's more that if it's not a secret anymore. It's as simple as that. It's just if you know, you know, if you don't, you don't, and that's fine. But it's not this thing I have to contain and suppress anymore. I've now got to a stage where I'm talking openly about it because since I have broken my silence, I've been alarmed at how many people have come forward and said me too. and they haven't gone to the police and they haven't felt able to go to the police. Some don't want to go to the police, and that's fine. It's not a place of judgment. It's everybody's different. But there is a shocking amount of people out there that suffer in silence, and nobody would know any different because they're not talking about it.
So has there been a cost to speaking out at all, Angie?
Uh, yes and no. I mean, mostly people have either been indifferent, which is fine. I kind of expected that. Most people have been very supportive, to be fair. But there have been people that have said you're attention seeking, or just forgive and forget and move on, or just let it lie. And I think the assumption is that once you've been to court, you just go back into the life of silence again. So you live a life of silence, you fight it, you own it, you go to the police, you do all the right things, should I say. And now it's done and dusted. It's like, well, now just go back into being that quiet person again because it makes their life more comfortable. So that's really been the thing that I've had to probably struggle with from other people, which is only a small proportion, to be fair. It's not that many. And then from a personal perspective, it feels very weird to be talking about it, but simultaneously liberating as well. So that's really been the biggest cost, is actually getting past my own internal blockages and then dealing with I guess, a small amount of trolling as well.
And that's what I was going to ask about when you said there's some people have been really supportive and others have been saying that you're attention seeking and just forgive and forget. Are those people known to you, or were they people in the general public who feel they have a right to opine on this?
They were just random punters online. So a couple of people on LinkedIn, one person on YouTube. Um, like not people that I know personally and that know me personally, which obviously means that they make their own judgment about my motivations. Because if you know me, you'd know what my motivations are and how passionate I speak about this and how passionate I am about it and how upset it has it, how upset I have been, sorry, throughout this process and emotionally up and down. Good days, really good days, low days, days when I just feel nothing. I'm just kind of numb. So it's not just a linear kind of like progression or just one kind of, you feel the same all the time. You do bounce around a lot. And anybody that knows me will have seen that and understand that. But naturally, people don't understand my intentions. So strangers will make their own judgments and misjudge me.
Always. That's what people do. Share with us what those motivations, intentions are, and why you're so passionate about speaking about this.
I think the key thing really is the amount of silent survivors that have come forward. It's such a shocking amount, and also it isn't just women; it's mostly women. It's about 90 to 95% women, I would say, in my experience. And there's men out there as well, so it's not gender specific. So I know that me being open, I want to be able to inspire other people to, if they are suffering in silence, to not feel like they're alone. If they are suffering in silence, maybe hearing me talk would be enough to be like the trigger point for them to maybe go and report their attack. Because a lot of people do have a misconception that it's too late now, nobody will take me seriously now, because obviously mine's historic. There's so many historic people out there, particularly people that were offended in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. In that era, it was seen differently. And in that era, the police did handle it differently. So those people probably understandably didn't do anything about it, but now feel it's too late. So I want to inspire people that to realize that it's not too late. People in the UK, anyway, I know there's different laws in different countries. And I think one of the things I'd really like to see is some form of justice reform. Now, I'm not under any illusion that I can possibly do that on my own. But the more people we have banging this drum, the more likely there is going to be a change because the justice system is very, very difficult. I would recommend it to people to do it, but I think people need to go into it with their eyes wide open so they know what kind of twists and turns and punches in the face that they're likely to receive. And if you're not ready for that, it can be demoralizing.
Share with us what your experience has been from the moment you reported it to, well, I guess, the 6 years of being in the system.
I think, yeah, it's a really good question. I think at the very beginning, it was more disbelief. Oh my God, I've actually done it. I can't believe I've done it. After 23 years, breaking a promise to myself, because I swore to myself at age 16, nobody can ever find out about this. Like, just felt so dirty and horrible. Um, and then there was a spell where it went really quiet, where there was a very long investigation that was going on with the police. Also coupled with COVID chucked that into the mix as well. So everything got slowed down because of lack of resource, whatever it is that everybody was saying. And then when it really ramped up for me was when the CPS accepted my case, because up until then, it was still unknown if the CPS were going to take it. So obviously the police have to put a file together. Well, I say obviously, people might not know this, but the police have to put a file together, send it to the CPS. The CPS have to then look at the video interview from my side and his side because he had to be arrested and interviewed too, witnesses, all the statements, the investigation, the leads, everything the police did, put it together in a file, send it to the CPS, and they have to approve it as something they will accept or not, which is a number of different factors that go into that decision making. And as soon as I got that phone call from the police to say CPS have approved it, like this is happening, like we're going to court, it was an immediate shift. It was anxiety suddenly increased because I was like, oh my God, excuse the French, but shit's getting real. That was really how it felt. And then the uncertainty of what that looked like, how aggressive the barristers were going to be, what were other people going to say, what would happen, how would he react if I didn't win and he got off, and any retaliation afterwards. So there was a lot of anxiety. There was also relief. There was just, I think it was an emotional turmoil because there was grief coming out of me. Then I started having PTSD attacks. I've never had a PTSD attack in my life until this really started ramping up. So I think that some unresolved trauma from such a young age that I'd never looked at, never faced, never dealt with, suddenly started becoming, well, not forever, but there was a spell in particular during that couple of years that it was becoming almost a weekly occurrence, or a couple of weeks, a couple of times a week, should I say, for a number of months, to the extent where I almost felt scared to leave the house because a couple of them happened in public, which is embarrassing because I'd spent the last God knows how many years being a leadership coach, working with leaders and talking about confidence. And despite the fact that I was still confident as a person, I was dealing with emotions and symptoms that I hadn't even studied, didn't really know a lot about. I was very confused by them. So it was intimidating. And then I went into court in April 2025 and ended up with a hung jury. Hadn't even heard of a hung jury, but then also learnt how badly a court case can be handled because it was a bit of a car crash, if I'm honest. Had to go back in and have a retrial 6 months later, to which he was then sentenced within round about an hour by a completely different jury, handled completely different by the barristers. So the whole thing was a hell of an experience. But in terms of emotions, I think I've spoken to a few of the survivors on this point as well. And towards the end, particularly probably the last 12 months to maybe just over 12 months, it became near impossible to work. It is so derailing. And you have, I would call them a relapse. Another guy I spoke to called it reactivation. And you get spurts of energy and you feel motivated to work again, and then something happens and it knocks you back 3 steps, and which you always feel like eventually you ended up further in a worse place than where you started. So rather than starting and stopping and starting and stopping and starting and stopping with so many projects, I just went, let's just not do that because I think I'm causing more damage than good. So I took my foot off the accelerator in 2025. I still did a bit of social media. And then 2026, which brings us to now, I've just completely gone on a sabbatical and just been in that process of healing, basically. So, in terms of how it's been like a whirlwind. From the outside, it's probably looked a little bit up and down, but from behind the scenes, sometimes it's really high, sometimes it's really low, and only if you've been through something similar could you possibly relate to that, because the other people that I know that have had exactly the same experience.
Yeah, I can't even begin to fathom what you've been going through. You mentioned about these emotions and that you'd never studied them before. And it's a really interesting thing that we live in this world, in the body that we have, and we're experiencing the events that happen every day, but we're not equipped, or we have the preparation for understanding and dealing with emotions. No one teaches us how to do that. You have to just muddle through.
Mm.
What did you learn about emotions?
I think the in terms of emotions, about how quickly they can be activated, whereas before I was much more, and I am probably back now, but during the most difficult spell, my emotions could be activated very, very quickly. So I could get, as opposed to being much more emotionally regulated, something could spike it, and you could go to a rage within, and this is all typically dealt with behind the scenes as well. It wasn't something, it wasn't I wasn't unhinged in public or anything or lashing out at friends and family. It was more, oh my God, like today I'm having a really dark day, and the next day you could be elated, and it was just such a up and down thing. But outside, which is connected to emotions, but the thing that I really learned most about, just from an experience, haven't studied it by any stretch, but is the PTSD side of it. So there would be sounds or images or something would just catch my unconscious mind. And I wouldn't even realize it until my body started reacting in a way where I started getting nausea, or my body would kind of convulse in this uncontrollable shaking way. And I couldn't even realize at the time, why is my body doing this? And it would take sometimes 5 or 6 seconds for my brain to catch up. So my body's reacting in this horrible way. And seconds later, my brain's like, oh yeah, that's because that was a scene from the assault and it's just triggered it. And but there's a terrible little spell in the middle where you have no idea what's going on because you've got this reaction without the conscious awareness of what the hell's happening. So that was something I just learned to cope with. And I haven't actually had anything like that for months and months now. It was probably mostly at the end of 24 and probably leading up to the first trial in April 25.
So going back to how that all closed out, share with us what the end of those 6 years of being in the justice system was like for you.
Sure. It's a yeah, it's a really good question again, because I thought, and most people that I speak to seem to think that everything's going to be over once the court date is over. Like the anxiety was around the court. And actually, it was just the entire emotional container of emotions for 6 years that just kind of was suddenly allowed to be let go of. But it isn't like it's just like a balloon and pops and just goes. It's a very slow decompression. So something that I've learned is that the first 3 months, I was still probably just as anxious, but with a slightly more calm undercurrent because obviously it was over and he was down and everything else. Um, and then I realized how many people were suffering because I'd spoken to people just one to one and the amount of people that said me too. So I actually broke my silence in January publicly and waived my legal anonymity, as the phrase is. But even from then, I think I was quite het up and still quite carrying a lot of anger and anxiety, and still. So even since then, every month I can feel a slight difference of becoming more grounded, more calmer. It's almost becoming, oh yeah, I did that thing. God, can you believe I actually went through that? Whereas before it was just consuming my thoughts every single day, and it's all I could think about, and it's all I could talk about. And now it's, oh yeah, there's that thing that happened to me that I'm much more able to talk about now without being emotional with it. And I think that's probably the part that I underestimated. And I think it's a part that many of the people probably underestimate. It's the way I describe it. And I'm not saying it's exactly the same, obviously, but if somebody's been to war for 6 years and they've been in the battlefield and they've some days been dodging bullets, some days have had bad days, good days, whatever. But if you're in that environment for 6 years, you don't just come back from war and then just go, right, cool, just crack on then. I'll just go back to my desk job. There's so much that you have to process of like, what the hell just happened? And what was that all about? And why did it take this long? And it was brutal. So you still have to kind of heal from that. And I underestimated that. And I think if anybody else is listening to this that is going through something similar, or maybe in the justice system themselves, don't expect to pop out the other end feeling happy and relieved. Like be prepared to feel empty. And for a little while, just literally feel nothing and almost be worried that you've got no emotions. But it was almost like it was so much, my body just switched off for a little bit. It was just my brain was just computing everything, but my body was just couldn't feel anything for a couple of weeks at least. So it goes from that to high to low to actually just a much more level of stabilization.
And now you're on this sabbatical to sort of take complete time out and not have any pressure from working or the routines of life that you had. What is it you want to achieve?
You mean when I return to work or in my sabbatical?
The next chapter of Angie's life is yeah, I mean, I don't know what that looks like.
It's still not 100% clear to me. I know that I'm a lot clearer now than I was a few months ago. I think you and I spoke a few months ago, and even then I wasn't particularly sure of what that looked like. And even now it's becoming a bit more clear, but it's not crystal clear. But like we said at the time, it's one of those things that I probably have to go into it and just see how it materializes. I might try something and think, actually, I don't enjoy this as much as I expected. I'm going to try and navigate it this way, which is exactly what happened when I was a coach. So there's still going to be some coaching in me because historically that's what I've done for the last 10 years. But I think what really hits home for me at the moment is how much I've noticed like we said, the cost of silence. It's the phrase that I keep using at the moment. And the cost of silence is massive. And it was very much what my old work used to be about anyway. I was helping people become more assertive and hold better boundaries and speak their mind, and which impacts on every walk of their life, like whether it's work, personal life, relationships, whatever. Um, but if people are suffering in silence, people don't realize the impact on them that it's having, and also indirectly impact on the relationships that they have as well. But also having the experience of being a coach, I can also make a huge amount of parallels of how this impacts corporations as well, which is no different from on it's much lower stakes, but it's the same psychology behind it of when you go into a meeting and everybody seems very agreeable, and then the moment you walk out, everybody stood in the corridor saying it won't work and how rubbish all the ideas are, but nobody's actually being that honest and that open. So actually the cost of silence doesn't just impact on the individual deeply, it impacts on the level of communication and what level of depth of honesty you get out of somebody, which then impacts on businesses, it impacts on friendships, it impacts on relationships. So once people understand how to be more communicative and releasing whatever it is that they're holding back, it changes how you feel about yourself, it changes how you feel about what you say and how you say it. It changes everything, and it has a bigger impact on the person you're speaking to as well. That's my passion, to have an impact on people moving forward, whether that be through coaching. I love the idea of running workshops. I'm certainly going to not be silent again, so I'll be talking about it intermittently on social media, whichever channel I choose, in order to keep pushing that message out there.
And what I also hear from this is that there was a promise that was made to yourself when you were 16 that you kept and honored and respected and trusted for 23 years, that that wasn't going to be broken. And there was a conflict that lay in that promise that you made, because it was made by a 16-year-old version of yourself who didn't know any better, other than at the time it felt dirty and horrible, and didn't have an understanding of what
Mm-hmm.
it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so you held the promise because that's who you are. You have this honesty and level of communication with yourself to not break it. But in the end, you did.
True. Very true. And I'm glad I did. I don't regret breaking it. I think the promise I made at age 16 was obviously coming from a very naive mind. It was mostly driven from fear. It was mostly driven from shame. It was mostly driven from confusion. And because I couldn't really articulate what had happened properly, um, and I didn't know how to explain to people that this had happened with a partner, and I thought I was to blame because I went into the room before it happened willingly. It wasn't like he physically dragged me in by my hair, but there was, I mean, it was violent, don't get me wrong, but it was, yeah, I thought, how could I possibly justify that to police? Because in my head at age 16 I believed that you had to be jumped by a stranger down an alley, beaten up, tied up with rope or something, and then somebody has the way with you, whatever. So because none of those tick boxes were evident, and he was my partner, and I didn't believe that actually it could ever be legally called rape by a partner. And in my defense, the law only changed in 1993, which is only 3 years beforehand, when I was 13, that it became illegal for a man to rape his wife. So only in the 90s did that law change. And I was hardly going to be studying sexual law when I'm 13, 14 years old. So up until then, all I'd ever heard is that a partner couldn't be done for rape. I always thought and it felt like rape, emotionally, mentally. Obviously, the injuries were evident as well. But I didn't think I could ever say to somebody, this happened to me and this is what it was called. Because at age 16, I was just too naive. And it wasn't until I became an adult that it became clearly that's what it was. But then I thought, well, it's too late now. So then it was a whole, like a whole chain of different thoughts and thinking processes throughout that whole journey. So I'm glad I came to my senses and realized that I could break that secret without it being a bad thing.
Absolutely. And this is what I'm hearing here is the speaking out, the speaking out, the articulating of your experience and sharing that publicly has put yourself in a vulnerable position, but in doing so, it allows others to step up, step forward, to share their experiences as well.
Yes, and on top of that, five people that I'm aware of anyway that have told me is that since I've spoken to them, a couple of them were before I actually went to court, but there were people I just happened to be speaking to beforehand. Five people in total now have gone to the police and reported their assault, which was a historic assault. So I don't, they wouldn't have done that had they not have heard my story. Now that's not me doing that. It's just it's that in somehow some form of belief has been instilled in them that actually they can do it and it's the right thing to do, and how much freedom they will get from actually doing what they did. Whether they make it to court is still in the lap of the gods. I don't know. But regardless of that, the healing that I got from reporting it was still going to be the same regardless of the verdict. I mean, the verdict is the cherry on the top of the cake, or cherry on the icing, as the phrase goes. But actually, so much healing had happened already that one of the things I'd say to my family and friends is that I've already won, regardless of if he goes down to prison. I've already won because I've had such a journey of that healing process that I wouldn't have had I've continued to contain this secret.
Yeah. So that's something that I really want to just reiterate or just hear back again, because the healing was in the reporting of it, not in the guilty verdict that then came out. So, yes, that is the outcome that you're expecting, hoping, desiring. But for you, simply stepping forward and reporting it was the most important part of this whole process.
I'd say the most important, and I'd also say the most difficult. That I actually called 101. I didn't go into the police station, but that very, very first call I made was by far, in terms of how difficult it was, and that's only a reflection of where I was at that time. So the difficulty is measured on who you are as a person at that time, and who I was at the point of reporting it. That was by far times 10, maybe more, the hardest part of the whole 6 years.
And you say that the difficulty is measured on who you are as a person. Who were you as a person at that time versus now?
Sure, I think I'd learned a lot of the psychology of confidence. I'd become a lot more confident. I'd become good at using my voice, which is something that I didn't do much when I was younger, just generally day to day, holding boundaries, speaking out, sharing opinions that might be slightly controversial, disagreeing with somebody, saying no, all the basics. I became good at doing that. Um, but basically, the way I always tend to word it is that I went on a huge self-development journey for 20 odd years. And I would say if I had 50 boxes to open and put to rest, some of them were quick and easy, some of them were a bit more entangled and I had to go into deeper work. But when I never ever thought that box 50, which was this, would ever be open. So I always just thought if I can get to box 49, that would be amazing. Like that, just that's such a hell of a journey. But in terms of who I was, I think I didn't, there was always a part where I still shamed myself for not coming forward. And that isn't to say if anybody's listening to this, God forbid, that I'm saying that they have to or they should do and they will have that impact. But for me, I carried a lot of anger at myself for not doing it because he was still getting away with it, having a life of freedom at the cost of my own. So I'd gone on this big journey that I'd become a lot more confident, a lot more sure of myself, a lot more able to speak out. But there was still a damaged part of me that I was keeping damaged as long as I kept this secret in. And that unlocked it. Going to the police unlocked it. And regardless of what happened after that, I could go to my grave, and this is the saying I always say, but I could go to my grave and look in the mirror and say, I tried. No matter what the outcome was, I tried. It was the fear of going to my grave and say I didn't even try because I was too scared. So I don't really quite know what the words are to describe the difference between who I was then and who I am now, other than I feel so much more connected with myself is probably the best way. Feel so much more, not just confident, because confident I can still do things in the way I could do 10 years ago. I'm much more sure of myself. I've got much firmer boundaries. I've got higher self-worth is probably, and that this piece was the missing piece of that final piece of the jigsaw, I think.
And it had to come from within. It couldn't come from externally. It couldn't be something that happened or you were told. This had to be you proving to yourself that you had done something.
Yeah. I could have 1,000 people a day tell me that I'm wonderful, and it would never have changed a thing until I had done this one particular part that was my trauma, my damage, my secret. I had to do it for me. And that was by far the most the biggest unlocking part of the whole journey, definitely.
This podcast is called Focus on Why. It's the meaningful significance that we assign to our purpose. And purpose is the overarching intention that guides our direction in life. How does that relate to what you've done and what you're going to do?
My purpose now feels very much, it's all voice related, it's all communication related. As long as I'm talking, I'm happy. And if you know me, you probably know I've often got a lot to say. On the flip side of it, it's been such a game changer from not just reporting the rape, but just going from a place where I was terrified to speak out, say no to people, just in like general conversation, you know. That isn't to say I didn't say no in the assault, just to be absolutely clear on that. But in terms of day-to-day communication, talking to bosses, like having clear of what my own boundaries were, I was terrible at communicating those to other people. And the unlocking of healing that I got by just learning to speak more was actually a huge part to actually thinking I can do this. Like this is just the next step of communicating. And the more I communicate, the more I'm open, the more I see other people being inspired by that, the more people I help. That for me feels like what my purpose is to help other people communicate in a way of truly who they are, not just everybody's talking. It's not about words coming out of physically coming out of people's mouths. It's actually communicating what is true to them, what they really, really think, what they really, really feel, but from a place of what their experience is. That isn't a license to go around being mean to people and say, well, I said she's fat, so I'm being honest. Like that isn't the message here. It's actually what is it that your experience is? What is it what you believe is true? What is it that happened to you and like you need to talk about? And it's once you unlock that, you can't be, it's almost like you become, nobody can manipulate you because there's nothing to manipulate because you're being so open about it. Nobody can backstab you. Well, they can try and backstab you, but they can't backstab you in the same way because everything they're trying to repeat is either going to be a lie or something that you're open about anyway. So there's so much stuff that actually empowers you because none of your life can be used against you.
And this is for anyone, this advice that you're giving is not anyone who's just experienced a trauma such as you yourself. This being honest and being true and understanding what it is that you want, what you don't want. A lot of people know that. They know what they don't want, but they don't know what they actually want. And they live the life that they expect or others to think they should be living, as opposed to taking personal responsibility and living their life aligned to who they are. I see this time in, time out, day in, day out. So many people are not engaged or disengaged in their work. In fact, the last Gallup report said 79% of the workplace are acting like this every day. And
Wow.
it's not a good place to be.
I agree. And even down to, much, much smaller stakes than going through the justice system, but something I used to come up a lot when I was coaching is that people would make jokes publicly, maybe in an office or a sports team or in a friendship group. And then those jokes would sometimes be very offensive to that person, but they wouldn't say, that offends me, or I don't need to joke about that, because they'd feel that they would look like they were being pedantic or petty or oversensitive. So they would just laugh along with everybody else as if it's really funny. And actually, they'd go home really hurt by it and really put out by it. And that's the type of thing that I was saying before, that I didn't use my voice. Like before, I would have been the person that laughed with them if a joke was made at my expense because I didn't want to look silly or stand out in any way. But all effectively I was doing is giving them permission to carry on. Whereas now it would be harder for me to not say something and say, look, that actually, I don't like it. That offends me. Can you please not make those jokes? Whereas that wasn't me who I was 20 years ago. So it's that type of thing. But that plays out in every walk of life. You're absolutely right, regardless of if they've been assaulted in any way. It can be friendship groups, it can be the boss that makes jokes, it can even be harassment at work, it could be racial or sexual discrimination. There's so many different aspects that people don't say anything because they're scared of how they might look to other people. But actually, how much more liberated would they feel if they were willing to have those conversations and they were willing to speak out? And that's what I used to do as a coach before. And I'm still planning, I still want to do that. But on top of that, it's actually people understanding the cost of silence and how much damage it does to them by not speaking out in that way.
Yeah, I hear you. So it really does come down to consent and permission to right in every aspect of what you're talking about. Yes, to the extreme level that you have experienced, but again, to the daily small goings on where you haven't given someone permission or your consent for them to offend you or to upset you in this way.
or to talk about that particular thing or to joke about
Yeah.
it. I'd never even connected those two, but you're absolutely right. 100%. Like it is very much around what do you give other, like what are your boundaries, which I've always been banging on about for years in my social media. But what basically you're saying, this is what I consent to and this is what I don't consent to. And that is different for everybody. So some people have very broad boundaries and they love banter and they love having jokes and being center of them. Other people hate it, but everybody judges each other on what they think is appropriate for them. So in like inadvertently, you might easily be offending somebody, but if that person doesn't communicate that they don't want it to happen, they end up carrying that. And that eats into their weekends, it eats into their evening time. It isn't just something that happens in the moment. It has a, catalytic effect of other things afterwards as well.
It's interesting, isn't it, when we have these conversations, how you can make those connections going back, and
Mm.
that actually what has been your purpose has been working its way, evolving over the years, and where you didn't realize you've been talking about having firm boundaries, and you then held yours finally.
Mm. Yes, and one of the hardest parts is that the even after I reported it, I had then I was like clearly holding the boundaries because being active and doing something about it from a with the authorities, but then I couldn't talk about it because, and there I was doing public speaking events and, making social media posts around holding boundaries and using your voice. And I was still being silenced, not actually out of choice this time. It was through, I was fearful if I said anything publicly, it might compromise my trial, so I couldn't say anything. So even then, I was still talking about use your voice and be assertive and all this. And yet I was still in a place of being silenced, which was, I haven't lost the irony of that, to be honest.
Yeah, there was a reason. I understand, because you didn't want to do anything that would throw the trial out. So, oh, Angie, honestly, I just want to say thank you for sharing your journey, your experience, because it will help so many people just hearing the evolution of over the years, how this has affected you to where you are now, and knowing that there's still an onward journey, that this is going to evolve further, that you're going to have such an impactful contribution with the work that you're going to do, even though it's not clearly defined. That's okay, because that's the way purpose and the focus on why it does evolve. It really does, because you will know eventually where that goes, and then even then it will take it on another journey, because it just constantly really does. From my experience, having seen so many people and heard so many people on this podcast, once you know the path, it really does make such a difference to so many people. So thank you for sharing your experience.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
How would anybody reach out and connect with you? I know you're on a sabbatical, but I'm sure you're touching base here and there.
I am, yeah, and I'm building up to returning to work. I'm very keen to get back into the workshops of helping companies like have a bit more openness in businesses as well. The most common way is through LinkedIn. That's the platform that I'm on. I've just opened a YouTube account and I'm going to start putting my email in the actual bio there. It's worth mentioning that as well. I've named it Angie McQuillan Unsilenced, and the whole purpose of this, I'm going to dedicate every video to documenting my journey within the justice system and the myths and the misconceptions that we have around being silenced and what it feels like to be silenced. So I'm only posting like one, maybe two videos a week, which shares my story and why it took 23 years. And people say I'm brave, but actually it was never driven from bravery. It was driven out of I had no other choice. It almost felt like I couldn't. So that's something of if people want to find me there, that's another place to go because they'll get a lot more detail around the steps that you have to go through in order from reporting to end as well. I'm currently on Instagram as well, just under my name, Angie McQuillan. I don't really post there so much. I'm much more active on LinkedIn and YouTube at the moment. So they're the main two places, I would say.
Fantastic. Well, all those links are in the show notes. So if there's anyone who is listening right now, you know how to get in contact with Angie and step forward, use your voice and not remain in this space of silence or, oh, what's the word?
Avoid the cost of silence.
Yeah, absolutely that.
Mm.
Really is. Angie, thank you. Do you have some final words, please, for the listener?
The final words. Can I share a very quick story, which might,
Mm,
yeah. So, in my entire life, every time somebody's found out that there's been a bit delayed reporting, every single person that I've been talking to that wanted to know has basically said, "Why did it take you so long to come forward?" It's a fairly standard. I've heard it from pretty much everybody. But there was one time in the pub with my friend, and he didn't ask for that question after he said, "What was the time delay again?" I said, "It's 23 years." And instead of asking me why it took so long, he simply said, "How did you cope for so long, having not come forward?" And it completely spun it on its head. So I guess my final words are if you are communicating with somebody who is a silent survivor or who is on the cusp of coming forward, or even if they're not going to go to the police, just sharing their story, rather than making it kind of for them to justify it and for them to explain themselves, actually tap into from a place of I understand you, so tell me what, or even something like what was the circumstances at the time that stopped you from feeling able to come forward or something like that, which shows a little bit more understanding for the person who's on the receiving end of it. And for me, it was just so profound. He caught me off guard and actually had a bit of a wobble in the pub at the time because it was the first time in my life somebody ever asked me that question because I felt so validated and understood in that moment. So I guess that to me was such a profound moment with just one simple question. I just want to drop it in there for other people if they are talking to survivors, just to slightly change the tweaking of the words, which has such a different connotation attached to it and such a different impact.
perfect. It's a wrap.